Good morning. This is retired Pastor Karl from Calvary Lutheran Church, in one of the Lutheran churches in Amherst, New York, kind of a suburb of Buffalo. And we welcome you to a cold, chilly day. Yesterday, it was, I think, a nighttime temperature was 8 degrees below zero. But then again, it is the second week in January, we are in Buffalo, New York, so you do kind of have to expect the temperatures to start to drop. So that's how it's been. Well, we really don't have much snow in the way to speak of. I mean, there's a little bit of snow along the curb line here, but the lawns are bare of snow, but the ground is kind of frozen because we've had such cold temperature. So you take the dog out for a walk, but you really bundle up because otherwise you're going to get cold. So that's kind of the weather here. Today's, I can't really tell you what direction the sun it might be in. I know what direction it is in. It's east because it's morning, but you wouldn't know it from the sky. You can't actually point to where the sun might be because it's all just battleship gray out there. The whole sky is gray. And that's not the best, but then again, in the wintertime in Buffalo, we get sometimes weeks where it's just gray. You have to live with that. Of course, when we have great weather we do love it here. Anyways, let's see what else. We've had a tragic week. It's been a horribly tragic week. We've had insurrection. We've had the Congress stormed. We've had federal police officer murdered while he was doing his job. Poor man went to work and was murdered at work by a seditious criminal mob. And that's sick as well as tragic. And we're praying for the officer's family, and we hope that those criminals are hunted down and arrested and tried with the fullest extent of the law, because that is a sick turn of events. We're about to have a new president in about 9 days. That's good news. That's wonderful news. And hopefully we won't have any more violence or sedition on the part of people who are the mind of sick people. That's awful. I'm 62 years old, and in all my 62 years, I can't think of anything more treasonous, more awful, more sick than what has happened here in the United States in the last week. It's not just disturbing, it's disgusting. And any description of it short of that is a lie. Part of the job of pastors is to preach the law as well as the gospel. And we don't usually need to do that in terms of man's law. Sedition, conspiracy, treason are categories of man's law. We usually do it in terms of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and the neighbor as thyself. And certainly the behavior of these people is a violation of both God's law. There is nothing in any sense that these people can claim is religious about their behavior. They are anti-God in every sense of the word. Because God says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that which is God's. And so it should be. So they are traitors to our country. They are seditious. They are rebellious. But they are also in violation of everything God has commanded in the 10 Commandments. So I just want to get that on the table, because this is something that's going to be in the history books, that part of American history, just like we had the Vietnam years. This part of the history will go down as one of the lowest points in American history. the storming of the Capitol. It's a disgusting, lawless point. Well, that's the law for today, because it's a pastor's job to preach and teach. In the German, in Article 14 of the Augsburg Confession, it's predigen und lehren, preach and teach. And so that was my effort at teaching this morning, which is properly my job, although I'm retired. But it's a job of pastors anywhere, preach and teach. And so the American people, not just parishioners, but generally people, need to be taught what is a sin, and everything that was happening there is all sin. There is nothing but sin in that whole experience, of the worst, very worst nature. And I hope those who murdered that poor policeman, the Capitol officer, face the harshest forms of justice available. That would be the prescription of under the law, I believe. So that is a teaching moment of the law, both God's law and man's law. In religion, we describe this as lex humana, lex divina, the law of man and the law of God. The law of man is all of the statutes on the books, as well as the Ten Commandments. And lex divina is the gospel, the law of God. And that's what we want to get to this morning, the gospel, because teaching and preaching the law is not the proper work of a pastor. It is necessary, especially when lawlessness and rebellion and sedition and treason are on the lips and actions of citizens of the country. This country, that's something I in all my lifetime would never have thought I would ever have to verbalize. And yet here we are at this sick, disgusting moment. And yet, I hope anyone listening learns at least, because apparently lessons that children would learn, that violence and attacking one's government and people, fellow public servants, and trashing their workplace and storming the most sacred halls of government is wrong. And if you don't know that basic lesson, then, oh dear God, go back to school, go to the public library and take out some books on civics. And please learn something, because you've reached a point of mass ignorance that is unacceptable to a civilized society, any civilized society. And we claim to be a shining light on a hill. Not today. Not today. So for those part of the population that thinks that is something, please, dear God, go back and learn. So that's my job, exercising the lex humana, that you learn from this that is a sin and wrong. Violation of God's law and man's law. All right. Again, I said we'll get back to the gospel, because that's the proper use of this time. And today happens to be 1-10-21. That is the 10th day of January 2021. Wow, you can tell how old I am. 1920. 2021. Different. I have to move on this is how you know you're old, when you get the century wrong. That is a good marker. Okay, 2021. So, it happens to be the first Sunday after the Epiphany. The Epiphany, of course, is on January 6th. Also, the day that will now live in infamy in American history. It's not only when the Pearl Harbor, but along with Pearl Harbor Day, so will January 6th, the day of insurrection and treason. But it happens to be the first Sunday after the Epiphany. And it also, the text assigned for this first Sunday after the Epiphany is from Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 41 to 52. That's Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52. Let me read that to you. Now his, that would be Jesus, parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolk and acquaintances. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt thus with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee, sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business? And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Now, one of the reasons I started off with teaching this morning, and teaching the law, again, is the proper realm of the pastoral office, is because this is what Jesus spent doing at the young age of 12 years old. Just as a side note, learning Greek, dodeca. Still to this day, I think that word is funny. There's nothing funny about the number 12, however, but I still think that the Greek word dodeca just sounds humorous to me. Anyways, so Jesus was dodeca. He was 12 years old. He's about the age of, I don't know, maybe a 6th grader or maybe possibly a 7th grader, depending what age you started school. And so here he is. He's I don't think anyone would argue that a 6th grader or possibly a 7th grader is anything but a child. I don't think a 6th grader has ever been called an adult. And anyone who's raised children knows that a 6th grader is anything but an adult. They are a child in every sense of the term, especially in judgment and understanding. To understand the world as a 6th grader, a 12-year-old is to have typically a peripheral view of life. Life hasn't been lived or experienced yet. A 6th grader hears about things and still has fun and plays. They like to play sports. They like to play piano or to paint, or they like to practice things or study the stars or history, or it could be any number of things, or they could be involved in clubs. 6th graders are learning activities and things like that. But 6th graders are not typically known for advanced levels of understanding and discernment, especially not discernment. But here's Jesus at 12 years old. He's about a 6th grader, possibly 7th grader, and he is in the temple, and he's been there for days. I mean, they searched for him for a while, 3 days. They'd been there for days. So, and by the time they found him, it probably 5-6 days had passed, because obviously they didn't know where he was while they were at the Passover. You can't say Mary and Joseph are on the top of their game as parents. Here they are in the big city, and they've been living in a place like Nazareth, which is a tiny little place. I mean, it's barely a burg It's just a little place. And here they are in the big city, Jerusalem. It's a center of trade, and all sorts of people come and go, and they don't even know where their son is. Well, Mary and Joe, not doing too well on the parenting department there, boy, I tell you. Because if you've lost contact, not just sight, usually you try to keep a 12-year-old in sight, but especially in a big city, but if you've lost contact, you don't even know where he is or who he's with or what he's doing, that's not the paragon of parenting. Well, that happens to be the case here. So he's been there 5-6 days in the temple. Now he has relatives there. John the Baptist, he's from a priestly family, and his dad works in the temple, and they had grown up together. So, and it was their custom to go to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. It says, as was their custom. So Jesus had been visiting John since they were both little. In fact, the mothers, Mary and Elizabeth, spent time together during the pregnancies. And we have that account in the expression of the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord. And when Mary and Elizabeth met. So they knew each other, of course, related. And so Jesus had been to the temple. He knew his way around, and probably had stayed with John. I mean, they're both about the very same age, and I'm sure they palled around. So Jesus was not unfamiliar with this, which is probably why Mary and Joseph were not too terribly concerned about Jesus in the big city, because he probably wasn't by himself. He was probably hanging out with John the better part of the time, and John's family, because that would have been a big break, being from a small town, and not having, television and internet and things like that. And so being with his relatives in the big city was probably a break from small town living for Jesus. So here he is in the temple with the doctors of the law. And these are learned men, very wise men. These are the cream of the crop of Israel. This is their capital city. This is their leaders and the people of discernment, the ones who have to decide matters of law, jurisprudence, matters of right and wrong, and they lead the nation. They gather together in the Sanhedrin to make decisions to guide their country. They're not an independent country. They're a nation under Roman rule, and they'd been under foreign rule for, hundreds of years, going back to the days of the captivities, which goes back nearly 700 years BC. So they had no memory of being, like, for instance, back in the days of King David, 1000 BC, when they were their own nation with a capital city, Jerusalem, and the dedication of the temple. Those days were far behind them, outside of their memory system, outside of their corporate living, and they were entirely used to being a vassal nation under Roman rule at this point. But they still had to have some internal level of rule, and the Romans counted on them to provide that, because the Romans didn't try to micromanage everyone. They simply tried to keep peace, the Pax Romana. They kept peace because they had such an imposing military and political system and social system and cultural system that really no one presented a challenge to the Romans outside of their empire. They were pretty secure at the time. So here is a 12-year-old in the temple, and what is he doing? Well, what we started off doing here this morning, teaching. When a people reach a point of ignorance and accepting wrong as right, which is where we are. Millions of people, apparently, in our country, look at things that are terribly wrong as right. I'm confused by this. I don't even know what to say. This has happened before in countries where people have embraced wrong as right, And that has always led to heinous criminality and tragedy, always. I don't know any example where it turned out well. It always went bad. And for those people, history shows it went bad. So here we have Jesus teaching matters of law and of mercy. Because you see, the finest message in Scripture isn't the law for us. The law is the lesser of the two messages that come from the mouth of God. The law condemns us. The law preaches no hope. The law says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and that there is none, not a single one, that is righteous. And the Greek, that's dikaiosune, righteousness, and in the Hebrew, it's tzaddik, to be a righteous man. And but God looks down, and in His estimation, now you can say whatever you want about yourself. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. The only estimation of you that matters is God's estimation. And when He counts and reckons human beings, He does it not individually, but as a whole. That all are fallen, all are wretched, all are lost and doomed, to put it simply. Doomed. You know, when you learn that you're doomed, there's just no good spin you can put on that. How are things going? Well, I'm doomed. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. See, there's no good way of looking at the word doomed. And before God, under sin, we are simply doomed. There is no good news in the law. The old expression, lex semper accusat, so that the law simply always accuses. That's the nature of the law. The law preaches death and only death. However, the gospel, which comes from the same mouth of the same God, the gospel, on the other hand, teaches a different lesson. The gospel is the same God who would put us to death and condemn us has changed His mind. That's the nature of the gospel, where the God, this mighty being, has looked at His creatures and decided a different destiny. Doom is the destiny under the law, but God did not desire doom for His creatures. God loves His creatures. This is John 3:16, for God so loved the world. So He changed the destiny of His creatures. And to do this, He sent His Son, born of Mary, raised by Mary and Joseph, as we have here in the text, at the age of 12. And customarily, they had gone up to Jerusalem for the Passover. And so we have the Son of God, who is doing that work which His Father, not Joseph, but God the Father, gave Him to do. And so He tells Mary and Joseph, His earthly parents, this very thing. He says, didn't you know that I have to be about my Father's business? How did you not realize this? I mean, I'm 12 now. Are you new here? Did you not realize? How could it be you didn't know this? He asks. How is it possible? But they didn't understand a word of what He was saying, because God the Father kept all of this out of their sight and from their realizations, because He had a work for His Son that was solo. Mary, Joseph, no one else assisted Jesus in the task the Father gave, and that was to accomplish a change in destiny for His creatures. That is to announce a good thing, a wonderful thing into the world. Whereas the news this past week has been tragic and awful, the gospel is a wonderful news, a blessed news, a news of freedom. You see, where people who would who would subjugate us to their disgusting, sick will, and God only knows what that would encompass, racism or who knows what. The Nazis had a sick will as well that included death for officials, which is a federal officer was murdered. He went to work hoping he would come home to his family, and he didn't because of the slime that ended up murdering him at work. Well, so there's a message out there of death and insurrection, but that's different than this message. The gospel has nothing to do with such people, and such people have nothing to do with the gospel. They may claim to be religious, but I assure you, they have nothing to do whatsoever with God or his message, because God and his message are about freedom. They're about where God changes our destiny away from doom, away from judgment, away from the law, to a completely different message of mercy, forgiveness, where God instead views us according to a different word from his mouth, acceptance, where God the Father, on account of his own work on our behalf in his Son Jesus, who came to teach and preach, just as what the call of all pastors is to do today, to teach and preach. Again, Article 14 of the Augsburg Confession, one of the Lutheran founding documents, as an organization. Of course, the source and norm of all religion is the Scriptures. But that is to preach and teach, Article 14, Predigen und lehren. It was written in German. And preach and teach. And so Jesus did those very two same things. This is what his ministry was about, preaching and teaching. Even at 12 years old, he was about the work his Father gave him in his Father's house, the temple in Jerusalem, where he would finally be taken for trial and execution on the cross. And that was the Father's purpose, that his Son would die for the sins of the world, and that the Father would accept his Son's life, because the law, the penalty of the law is to die. That's the cross. But there's still the obligation to fulfill the law, which is to love the Lord thy God. And this Jesus did perfectly. He loved his Father. And that's what the high priestly prayer of Jesus is about, the love which is between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And Jesus talks about that at great length in the end of the Gospel of John. And so this is what the Father accepts on our behalf, as though we had lived a perfect life of love, which I can't even imagine, especially in dark days such as these. And yet, this is what the Father accepts on our behalf, the gift that Jesus gives us, which is his own life, lived in perfect love with his Father, and also his death, to be our death. The Hebrew for death is mut, and this is what was preached by God in Genesis, in the opening chapters, as the penalty for human disobedience, for human brokenness, for what we euphemistically call sin, which is a far greater thing than I'm sure we imagine. And so this is the good news, the gospel, which is simply a Greek word. Well, it comes from a Greek word, euangelizomai, to announce a good news. And that's what the gospel is. It's simply announcing a good news and preaching and teaching it. And so that is the important work of the church. And like I say, I pointed out the law, because that is also the work of the church, is to steer people away from lawlessness, both in the civic realm and the religious realm. It's not our job to carry out the law. That's the job of civil authorities. But it's teaching what is right and wrong in the moralistic and in the civil sense is also part of religious duty, so that religious people turn out to be good citizens, not wretched, decrepit, rotten citizens, as we've seen in this past week. There's just nothing religious about these people. And I hope that their deluded selves can come to a realization that they have strayed far from anything that is remotely godly. There is nothing religious about them, nothing godly, but that they have sunk to a wretchedness and a wretched low. I hope that they get that understanding, and the civil authorities will carry out their duty to arrest those and try those and give proper punishment to those who have done all these wretched things to our country, because their offenses are against all of us. So, law, and on the other hand, gospel, on this first Sunday after the Epiphany, January 10th, 2021. From the Gospel of Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 41 to 52. So, I hope that this week following is a better week. We'll be preparing for an inauguration of a new president and vice president. We have many members newly installed into the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it would be good for Americans to refresh themselves by reading about our history and reading about the role of government and how our government works, because obviously there's a great deal of ignorance among our people. We have 320 million Americans, and I think a lot of them need to go back and study. Just simply get books and read and become more educated about our system of government, which is several hundred years behind it, of not always easy running, but at least it runs. And they need to read and study that. Other than that, wear a mask. If you have the opportunity to get the vaccine, which I am looking forward to getting. My wife is a teacher in this upcoming week here in New York. The governor has announced that teachers will be vaccinated, and my wife is eagerly looking forward to that. I'm just a retired old pastor, so it'll be a while before I get a vaccination, but that'll come too, and I'm eagerly looking forward to it. In the meantime, wear a mask, social distance, be safe, don't do ignorant things and endanger yourself or others. That would be the Christian way of life. And please, oh dear heavens, please, for those who think lawlessness is a good idea, please learn something. Don't live in such ignorant, disgusting filth. Rise above your ignorance and begin to learn. At least begin to learn. Study something. Because that doesn't make a good citizen. And we need good citizens, not the type of wretchedness that would think sedition is good. It is not. And so I hope that as a country we can improve and do better. Well, again, I'm retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary in outside of Buffalo, New York here in Amherst. And I wish you well and wish you health. Take care. Bye-bye.